At my sister's wedding, she announced, "I'm marrying the love of her life. He chose me instead." The guests gasped. I smiled, wished them happiness, and left quietly. On her honeymoon, she learned the truth about her perfect love story. "You're going to love my groom," Riley had whispered into the phone 3 weeks earlier, her voice bubbling with that familiar mischief I should have recognized as dangerous. "I can't wait for you to meet him at the ceremony." I'd laughed then, assuming she was being her usual dramatic self. Riley had always loved surprises, grand gestures, and making everything about her special moments. What I didn't expect was walking into St. Mary's Chapel on a crisp Saturday morning to find my entire family avoiding my eyes. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these powerful stories of resilience and truth. If you believe family betrayal deserves consequences, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. The chapel smelled of white lilies and expensive perfume. Rows of guests dressed in their finest attire filled the wooden pews, but something felt wrong. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when I appeared. Aunt Carol quickly looked away, pretending to fix her hat. Uncle Robert cleared his throat and studied his wedding program with unusual intensity. My stomach tightened as I made my way down the aisle, searching for an empty seat. The whispers followed me like shadows. "Poor Margaret. Can you believe it? I wonder if she knows." The words floated just loud enough for me to catch fragments, but not enough to understand their meaning. I slipped into a pew near the back, next to Mrs. Henderson from our old neighborhood. She patted my hand gently, her eyes filled with something that looked suspiciously like pity. "Sweetheart," she murmured, "are you sure you want to be here today?" Before I could ask what she meant, the organ music swelled. The wedding march began and everyone rose to their feet. I turned toward the altar, expecting to see some stranger Riley had been secretly dating. Maybe someone from her job at the marketing firm, or perhaps a friend from her yoga classes. Then I saw him. William stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, the same one we'd picked out together 6 months ago for our own wedding. His dark hair was combed back exactly the way I'd always loved it. He wore the silver cufflinks I'd given him for his birthday, the ones engraved with his initials. My legs nearly gave out. The chapel started spinning and I gripped the back of the pew in front of me to steady myself. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. But there he was, my William, standing at the altar waiting for my sister. The doors at the back of the chapel opened, and Riley appeared in a flowing white gown that cost more than my monthly rent. She looked radiant, her blonde hair perfectly curled, her smile bright enough to light up the entire room. She caught my eye for just a moment and winked as if this were all part of some elaborate joke we were sharing. As she glided down the aisle on our father's arm, memories crashed over me. William's strange behavior over the past few months. The canceled dinner dates. The phone calls he'd take in another room. The way he'd suddenly become distant, claiming work stress was overwhelming him. "We need to talk," he'd said 3 weeks ago, the same day Riley had called about her mystery groom. He'd stood in my kitchen refusing to sit down, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I think we should take a break. Figure things out." I'd begged him to explain what was wrong. We'd been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. We'd already sent out save-the-date cards for our September wedding. But he'd just shaken his head, mumbling something about needing space, and walked out of my apartment. Now I understood. While I'd been sitting at home, wondering what I'd done wrong, he'd been planning a future with Riley. The ceremony began and Reverend Matthews opened his book. His voice carried across the chapel as he spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. Each word felt like a tiny knife being twisted in my chest. "If anyone objects to this union," he continued, "speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence stretched endlessly. I could feel hundreds of eyes turning toward me, waiting, expecting. My family, my friends, even strangers seemed to hold their breath. But I said nothing. "Riley," Reverend Matthews continued, "do you take William to be your husband?" "I do," she said, her voice clear and confident. Then she turned toward the congregation, her smile growing wider. "And I want everyone to know that I'm marrying the love of her life. He chose me instead." She pointed directly at me. The chapel erupted in gasps and murmurs. Heads turned. Phones came out. Some people stood up to get a better look at the woman whose fiancé had just married her sister. I felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their pity. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to stand up and tell everyone exactly what kind of man William really was. Instead, I did something that surprised even myself. I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter smile, but something calm and genuine. I rose from my seat, walked down the aisle past all those shocked faces and approached the altar. William's face had gone pale. Riley's triumphant expression faltered slightly. "Congratulations," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent chapel. "I hope you'll be very happy together." I kissed Riley's cheek, nodded politely to William and walked back down the aisle. Behind me, I could hear the confused murmur of voices, the rustle of fabric as people shifted in their seats, trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Henderson caught my arm as I passed her pew. "Margaret dear, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I told her and realized with surprise that I meant it. "Really?" Outside the chapel, the spring air felt cool against my skin. Birds chirped in the oak trees lining the sidewalk. Life continued, normal and unchanged, while inside my sister celebrated stealing my life. But as I walked to my car, something strange settled over me. Not grief, not rage, but something much colder and more calculating. I knew William better than anyone. I knew his secrets, his weaknesses, his true nature that he kept hidden behind that charming smile. Riley thought she'd won. She had no idea what she'd actually gotten herself into. And for the first time in weeks, I found myself genuinely curious about what would happen next. The drive home from the chapel took 23 minutes. I counted every red light, every turn, every breath I took to keep myself steady. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, I sat in the car for another 10 minutes, watching other people live their normal Saturday lives. A mother pushed a stroller past my window. An elderly man walked his golden retriever. Life moved forward while mine had just imploded in front of 200 witnesses. My phone buzzed constantly with messages. I turned it off without reading any of them. The following Monday, I called in sick to work. Then Tuesday. By Wednesday, my supervisor Jennifer was leaving concerned voicemails about my family emergency. I appreciated that she didn't pry, didn't ask for details. Small mercies in a world that suddenly felt too sharp around the edges. My refrigerator became my calendar. Each day I moved a magnet from one square to the next, marking time until the hurt was supposed to fade. People expected grief to follow a schedule, didn't they? First comes denial, then anger, then bargaining. I waited for those stages to arrive, but they never did. Instead, I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left only the shell of who I used to be. The text messages started arriving on Thursday. "Sarah from college. Saw the wedding photos on Facebook. I'm so sorry, Margaret. Call me if you need anything. My cousin Julia. Mom told me what happened. That was awful of Riley. Want to grab coffee this weekend?" I crafted careful responses, each one designed to sound appropriately wounded. "Thanks for reaching out. Still processing everything. Need some time alone." Short enough to seem heartbroken, vague enough to avoid real conversation. The truth was, I didn't want their comfort. I didn't want their righteous anger on my behalf or their promises that William didn't deserve me anyway. I wanted to be left alone to figure out what came next. Riley's social media became a constant presence in my peripheral vision. She'd changed her profile picture to one from the wedding reception, her arms wrapped around William's neck while he spun her around the dance floor. They looked genuinely happy. Radiant even. The comments poured in from friends and family. "You two are perfect together. Finally found your soulmate. Can't wait to see what adventures await you." Not one person mentioned me. It was as if I'd been erased from the story entirely. 2 weeks after the wedding, she called. I stared at her name on my phone screen, letting it ring until voicemail picked up. An hour later, the notification appeared. I almost deleted it without listening, but curiosity won. "Hey, stranger." Riley's voice chirped through my speaker, bright and cheerful as if nothing had changed between us. "I know things are probably weird right now, but I wanted you to know that William and I are really, really happy. Like crazy happy. I think this was meant to be, you know? Sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we do." She paused, and I could hear William's laughter in the background. They were probably cooking dinner together in the kitchen of the house he and I had looked at just 6 months ago. The one with the big bay window and the garden space I'd planned to turn into an herb garden. "Anyway," Riley continued, "I hope you're doing okay. I love you, sis. Talk soon. The message ended and I sat staring at my phone for a long time. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just that she'd stolen my fiancé, but that she expected me to be happy about it. That she could mention their joy so carelessly, as if my feelings were just an inconvenient obstacle to overcome. I played the message 3 more times, studying the tone of her voice, the way she emphasized certain words. There was something performative about it, like she was reading from a script. Or maybe trying to convince herself as much as me. That night, I pulled out the old photo album I kept in my bedroom closet. Pictures of William and me at the beach last summer. At my birthday dinner in February. Christmas morning, both of us still in pajamas, surrounded by wrapping paper. In every photo he looked content. Relaxed. The way people look when they're genuinely happy. But as I studied his face more carefully, I started noticing things I'd missed before. How his smile never quite reached his eyes when other people were around. How he always positioned himself slightly behind me in group photos, as if he was trying to disappear. How his hand on my shoulder often looked more possessive than affectionate. I found our last photo together taken just 3 weeks before he'd walked out. We were at his company picnic, surrounded by his co-workers. He had his arm around my waist, but his attention was focused entirely on someone behind the camera. A woman with long blonde hair and a laugh that carried across the entire park. Riley had been there that day. She'd driven up to surprise us, claiming she happened to be in the area for work. I'd been happy to see her, proud to introduce my sister to William's colleagues. I'd even suggested she stay for dinner afterward. The memory shifted, taking on new significance. Riley flirting with the guys from William's accounting department. William suddenly becoming more animated, more charming than I'd seen him in months. The way they'd gravitated toward each other during the softball game, how naturally they'd fallen into conversation. I'd thought it was sweet at the time. My 2 favorite people getting along so well. Now I understood it had been the beginning of the end. I closed the photo album and walked to my kitchen drawer, pulling out the journal I hadn't touched since college. The leather cover was worn smooth, the pages yellowed with age. I'd filled it with poetry and dreams and all the dramatic thoughts that seemed so important at 19. This time I wouldn't write about feelings or hopes or heartbreak. This time I would write about facts. Details. The small moments that had led to this point, recorded with the precision of a court reporter. Because something told me I was going to need to remember everything. I opened the journal to the first blank page and wrote the date at the top. May 15th. Below it I started with a single line. William never liked it when I disagreed with him. The memory came flooding back immediately. Last Christmas at his parents' house, when his mother had asked about our wedding plans. I'd mentioned wanting a small ceremony, maybe something outdoors. William's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly, and later in the car he'd said, "You made me look stupid in there. Like I don't have any say in my own wedding." I'd apologized, confused about what I'd done wrong. He'd been silent for the entire 40-minute drive home. My pen moved across the page, recording detail after detail. How he'd gradually stopped wanting to spend time with my friends. "They're so negative," he'd say. "Always complaining about their jobs, their relationships. We don't need that energy." One by one I'd cancelled plans until invitations stopped coming altogether. There was the way he'd started monitoring my spending, even though we kept separate bank accounts. $50 for dinner with your coworker? That seems excessive. His concerned tone made it sound like he was looking out for me, protecting me from my own poor judgment. The restaurant incident came back with crystal clarity. We'd been at Romano's for our anniversary, and I'd ordered the salmon instead of the chicken he'd suggested. When the waitress left, he'd leaned across the table with that patient smile he wore when he was about to correct me. "The salmon here isn't that good, Margaret. I was trying to save you from disappointment." I'd switched my order when the waitress returned, feeling foolish for not trusting his judgment. Now I realized it had nothing to do with the quality of the fish. As I wrote, another memory surfaced. 3 months ago, William's laptop had been open on my kitchen counter while he showered. A notification had popped up from his email, and I'd seen the name, Chelsea Martinez, in the preview. Curiosity had gotten the better of me. The messages were buried in a folder labeled Work Archive, but they weren't about work at all. Chelsea had been his girlfriend before me, and their correspondence painted a picture I'd never wanted to see. "You're doing it again," she'd written in one message dated 2 years earlier. The little comments, the way you make me feel crazy for having opinions. I can't live like this anymore, William. I won't. His response had been ice cold. I never made you do anything, Chelsea. If you can't handle an adult relationship, that's your problem, not mine. Her final message had been longer, more desperate. You made me doubt everything about myself. My career, my friends, my own thoughts. That's not love, William. That's control. You destroy everything you touch, and someday you're going to realize what you've lost. At the time, I'd closed the laptop quickly, feeling guilty for snooping. When William emerged from the shower, I'd convinced myself that Chelsea was just bitter about their breakup. Every couple had their issues. People said hurtful things when relationships ended. But now, writing in my journal with the benefit of hindsight, her words felt less like the rantings of a scorned ex and more like a warning I'd been too naive to heed. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Haven't heard from you since the wedding. Just checking in. I could read between the lines. She wanted to know if I was planning to cause drama, if I was going to make things uncomfortable for the family by being bitter or vindictive. I texted back, doing fine. Just need some space to process everything. The truth was, I'd been processing more than anyone realized. Not just William's betrayal, but the intricate web of manipulation that had led to this moment. And as painful as it was to admit, Riley had been the perfect target. My sister had always needed to be the center of attention. In high school, she'd spread rumors that I was cheating on my boyfriend just so she could be the one to comfort him afterward. When Dad had rewritten his will 2 years ago, she'd spent months dropping hints about how much more she'd sacrificed for the family, how she'd stayed local while I'd gone away to college. She'd ended up with 60% of his estate while I got 40. But her jealousy ran deeper than inheritance or high school drama. She'd always wanted what I had simply because I had it. My grades, my friends, my job at the marketing firm downtown. She'd even applied to the same company after I got promoted, though she'd been turned down for lacking experience. The night of our last fight came back to me with startling clarity. William had shown up at my apartment agitated about something at work. His boss had passed him over for a promotion, and he was spiraling into one of his dark moods. I'd tried to comfort him, suggesting we order takeout and watch a movie, but he'd snapped. You don't get it, Margaret. You never get it. Everything comes so easy to you, doesn't it? Your perfect job, your perfect family, your perfect little life. That's not fair, I'd said. I work hard for everything I have. Do you? Or do you just coast on being everyone's favorite? His voice had turned cold, cutting. Your parents, your friends, even my friends think you're so wonderful. Poor Margaret, so sweet and innocent. Well, maybe some of us are tired of playing second fiddle to your act. I'd stared at him, shocked by the venom in his voice. What are you talking about? What act? Forget it. He'd grabbed his jacket from my couch. I need space to think. This whole thing, it's not working anymore. He'd walked out, leaving me standing in my living room, confused and hurt. I'd assumed he meant our relationship was moving too fast, that he needed time to sort through his career disappointment. I'd never imagined he meant he was done with me entirely. Now I understood. He hadn't gone home that night to think about us. He'd gone to Riley's apartment, probably with some story about how I didn't understand him, how I took him for granted. And Riley, always ready to step into my shoes, had welcomed him with open arms. I set down my pen and stared at the pages I'd filled. The pattern was becoming clear, connecting dots I'd been too close to see before. William's need to control, to diminish. Riley's constant hunger for what belonged to me. They deserved each other. But more than that, as I sat in my quiet apartment with the truth spread out before me in black ink, I realized something that should have terrified me but instead filled me with an odd sense of peace. I knew exactly what was going to happen to them. And for the first time since the wedding, I smiled. That smile stayed with me for days. Not the bitter, vindictive grin I might have expected, but something calmer. More patient. Like someone who had finally solved a puzzle they'd been working on for months. I closed the journal and tucked it into my nightstand drawer, next to the manila folder I'd almost forgotten about. Inside were printouts of emails, screenshots of text messages, and a handwritten letter on lavender stationery. Chelsea's warnings weren't the only ones I'd collected over the years. A week later, I returned to work. My colleagues tiptoed around me at first, offering careful smiles and avoiding any mention of weddings or relationships. By Thursday, the awkwardness had mostly faded and life settled into a new rhythm. I threw myself into my projects with renewed focus, staying late to reorganize client files and update marketing strategies. It was during one of these late evenings that Jessica from accounting knocked on my office door. "Margaret? I'm heading out, but I wanted to check on you. You seem different lately. More focused, I guess." "I feel different," I admitted. "Clearer about what matters." She nodded, then hesitated. "Listen, I probably shouldn't say anything, but I ran into your sister and her husband at the mall last weekend." She seemed. Jessica searched for the right word. "Stressed? Like really stressed?" She looked exhausted. I kept my expression neutral. "Wedding planning takes a lot out of you. She's probably just tired." "Maybe." Jessica gathered her purse. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that if you need anything, I'm here. Breakups are rough even when they're for the best." After she left, I pulled out my phone and opened Riley's social media profiles. The posts had become more frequent since the wedding, almost desperate in their cheerfulness. Pictures of elaborate flower arrangements with captions like, "My husband spoils me." Photos of expensive dinners at restaurants I knew William couldn't actually afford on his salary. But Jessica was right. In the most recent photos, Riley looked different. Thinner. Her smile seemed painted on, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. In one picture from last weekend, she was holding a glass of wine at some charity event, but her knuckles were white from gripping it so tightly. The comments underneath were telling too. Friends asking if she was okay, if she was getting enough sleep. Riley's responses were overly enthusiastic, full of exclamation points and heart emojis that felt forced. 2 weeks later, I was grabbing coffee at the little cafe near my office when I spotted them through the window. Riley sat across from William at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug like she was trying to warm herself. William was leaning forward, speaking in that low, intense way I remembered all too well. Even from outside, I could see the tension in Riley's shoulders. She kept nodding, but her eyes darted around the cafe as if looking for an escape route. When William reached across the table to grab her wrist, she flinched slightly before forcing another smile. I knew that conversation. I'd been part of dozens of them over the years. The gentle corrections that weren't gentle at all. The helpful suggestions that felt more like orders. The way he could make you feel grateful for his attention while simultaneously making you question every decision you'd ever made. I finished my coffee standing on the sidewalk watching them through the glass. Riley said something that made William's expression darken, and I saw him shake his head sharply. She immediately backtracked, her hands moving in that apologetic gesture I knew too well. By the time I walked away, she was nodding again, agreeing to whatever he'd demanded. That evening my phone rang. Riley's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered answering. Instead, I let it go to voicemail and listened to the message later. "Hey, it's me again." Her voice sounded smaller than usual, less confident. "I was just wondering if you wanted to grab lunch sometime. I feel like we haven't talked in forever and I miss you. I know things are weird between us right now, but you're still my sister, you know?" There was a pause and I could hear voices in the background. William asking who she was calling, Riley whispering that it was just work. Then she was back on the line, speaking quickly. "Anyway, call me back if you want. I love you." I saved the message but didn't return the call. Instead, I opened the manila folder again and spread its contents across my coffee table. Chelsea's letter was on top, the one that had arrived 6 months into my relationship with William. She'd found my address somehow, probably through social media, and sent it along with copies of the emails I'd later discover on his laptop. "I know you won't believe me," the letter began in careful handwriting. "I probably wouldn't have believed anyone who tried to warn me either. But William isn't who you think he is. He's charming and attentive at first, but slowly, so slowly you don't notice it happening, he'll start to change you. He'll isolate you from your friends, make you doubt your own judgment, convince you that his way is the only right way." At the bottom of the letter, she'd included her phone number and a single line. "When you're ready to talk, call me. I'll be here." I'd never called. Part of me had been afraid she was telling the truth, and part of me had been afraid she was lying. Either way, I hadn't wanted to know. Now I pulled out my phone and dialed the number. It rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "Hello. Chelsea? This is Margaret. Margaret Thompson. I think you knew William." There was a long pause. "Oh my God. Margaret. I wondered if you'd ever call. Are you okay? Did something happen?" I looked out my apartment window at the city lights below. He married my sister. Jesus. Chelsea's voice was soft with understanding. I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my own voice, I think it might be the best thing that could have happened. We talked for 2 hours. Chelsea told me things about William that I'd suspected but never confirmed. The way he'd monitored her text messages. How he'd convinced her to quit her job because her boss was clearly hitting on her. The methodical way he'd dismantled her confidence until she'd started believing she couldn't function without him. The crazy thing is, Chelsea said near the end of our conversation, I felt grateful when it was happening. Like he was protecting me from myself. It took me months of therapy to understand that what I thought was love was actually control. After we hung up, I sat in my living room holding the folder of warnings I'd collected but never heeded. Letters from Chelsea, emails from William's college girlfriend, even a voicemail from his ex-wife that I'd recorded when she'd tracked down my number 2 years ago. They'd all tried to save me. I'd ignored them all. But Riley hadn't asked for warnings. She'd taken what she wanted without caring about the consequences. So I would let her learn the same way I had. Through experience. And unlike William's other victims, she wouldn't get a rescue attempt from me. I put the folder back in my drawer and went to bed that night feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the hollow emptiness that had consumed me since the wedding, but genuine tranquility. For the first time, I understood that sometimes the best action is no action at all. Summer turned to fall, and I watched the changes happen exactly as I'd predicted they would. Riley's Instagram posts became sporadic, then stopped altogether. Her Facebook activity dwindled to occasional likes on other people's photos, never comments or posts of her own. When I checked her profiles, the most recent photo was from their honeymoon in Cabo, both of them grinning on a beach that looked like paradise. That was 3 months ago. At a family barbecue in September, my cousin Lisa pulled me aside while we were refilling our drinks at the kitchen counter. Have you seen Riley lately? Mom's worried about her. She looks so thin and she barely talked to anyone today. I glanced through the sliding glass door at Riley sitting alone on the patio furniture. William was across the yard talking to my uncle about golf, his hand gesturing animatedly as he dominated the conversation. Riley's plate sat untouched beside her, and she kept checking her phone with nervous, quick movements. Maybe she's just adjusting to married life, I said, adding ice to my glass. Big changes can be stressful. Lisa lowered her voice. It's more than that. Sarah invited her to book club last month, and Riley said she couldn't come because William had made dinner reservations. But when Sarah called the next day to see how dinner went, Riley said they'd actually stayed home and watched a movie. Why would she lie about something so small? I shrugged, keeping my expression neutral. Maybe she just got confused about the dates. But I knew better. I'd told similar lies during my time with William. Little contradictions that seemed meaningless individually but added up to a pattern of someone trying to cover for a partner's controlling behavior. The mental exhaustion of keeping track of which excuse you'd given to which person was something I remembered all too well. October brought the first real crack in their facade. I was at the grocery store on a Thursday evening when I heard familiar voices in the next aisle over. William's tone was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of shopping carts and background music. I told you to stick to the list, Riley. We don't need organic vegetables. That's just marketing nonsense designed to waste our money. I thought maybe we could try. No. Put them back. And while we're at it, why did you buy name brand cereal last week? I specifically said store brand is fine. I moved closer to the end of the aisle, pretending to study the pasta selection while I listened. Riley's voice was barely audible when she responded. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. That's the problem. You're not thinking. We're trying to save for a house and you're throwing money away on overpriced groceries like we're millionaires. When they emerged from the aisle, I got my first good look at Riley in months. Lisa had been right. She'd lost weight but not in a healthy way. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and there was a fragile quality to her movements, like she was afraid of taking up too much space. William walked slightly ahead of her, pushing the cart with aggressive efficiency while she trailed behind. At the checkout line, I watched him scrutinize every item as the cashier scanned it, questioning prices and making Riley explain purchases she'd apparently made without his approval. The people behind them in line exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I felt a familiar wave of embarrassment on Riley's behalf. I'd been in her position countless times, standing in public while William made me feel like a child being scolded for spending allowance money foolishly. November brought a phone call that I'd been half expecting for weeks. It was Riley's best friend Amanda, and she was crying before I even said hello. "Margaret, I don't know what to do. I'm so scared for Riley. She's not allowed to see any of us anymore. William says we're a bad influence, that we fill her head with negative thoughts about their marriage." I sat down on my couch, cradling the phone against my ear. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Amanda?" "Talk to her. She won't answer my calls anymore, but maybe she'll listen to you. You're her sister." "He's trapped, Margaret. He took her credit cards, her bank cards, everything. She tried to leave last month, but she couldn't even afford a hotel room." The desperation in Amanda's voice was real, but I felt nothing. No surge of protective anger, no impulse to rush to Riley's rescue. She'd made her choice with full knowledge of what she was taking from me. Now she was living with the consequences. "She made her bed," I said quietly. "Are you serious right now? This is your sister we're talking about. He's controlling every aspect of her life. She can't even leave the house without permission. Amanda, Riley is a grown woman. If she wanted help, she'd ask for it. She did ask. She tried to call you last month, but you never called her back. She's completely isolated, and now she thinks even her own family has given up on her." I thought about the voicemail Riley had left, the one where her voice had sounded so small and uncertain. I'd deleted it without saving it, just like I'd deleted the 3 others that had come after it. "What would you like me to do?" I asked. "Storm into their house and drag her out?" Riley chose William. She chose him over her own sister's happiness. She wanted my life, and now she has it. Amanda was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. "I hope you can live with yourself, Margaret. Because when something terrible happens to her, it's going to be on all of us who saw the signs and did nothing." She hung up, leaving me sitting in my living room with the phone still pressed to my ear. Outside my window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, dusting the sidewalks with a thin layer of white that would be gone by morning. I thought about Riley sitting in the house she'd dreamed of sharing with William, probably watching the same snow through windows she wasn't allowed to leave freely. I pictured her counting the hours until he came home from work, rehearsing conversations in her head to avoid saying anything that might set him off. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something approaching satisfaction. Not joy exactly. Not the vindictive pleasure I might have expected. But a deep, quiet sense that the universe had finally balanced itself. Riley had wanted to steal my life, and she'd gotten exactly what she'd asked for. Every single part of it. The snow continued falling as I sat there, phone silent in my lap, thinking about Amanda's words. When something terrible happens to her, it's going to be on all of us. But Amanda was wrong about one thing. Nothing terrible was going to happen to Riley that hadn't already happened to every woman before her who'd gotten involved with William. December came and went without any contact from Riley's side of the family drama. Christmas was awkward but manageable. Riley and William attended my parents' dinner, where she sat quietly picking at her food while he charmed everyone with stories about his new promotion at work. I watched from across the table as she flinched when he reached over to fix her napkin, the small gesture looking caring to anyone who didn't know what to look for. By January I'd made my decision. I spent a weekend organizing everything I'd collected over the years. Chelsea's letters, the screenshots from William's laptop, the voicemail from his ex-wife, even the business card from the therapist who'd called me anonymously after treating one of his former girlfriends. The woman had violated ethical guidelines to warn me, saying she'd never forgiven herself for staying silent when another patient had ended up in the hospital. I arranged everything chronologically, creating a timeline that showed William's pattern across multiple relationships. Then I wrote a single note on plain white paper. "You wanted my life. Now you're living it." The package went out on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year and 2 days after their wedding. I used a generic manila envelope with no return address, mailing it from a post office across town. Inside, along with my note, were copies of everything. Every warning I'd received and ignored. Every red flag I'd collected but never acted upon. Riley would finally understand that her fairy tale romance had been carefully orchestrated. That I'd known exactly what William was when I let her take him. that every moment of her suffering had been as predictable as the sunrise. The first call came that evening. Riley's name appeared on my phone screen at 7:43 p.m., and I watched it ring until voicemail picked up. She didn't leave a message. The calls continued for 3 days straight, sometimes as many as 15 in a single afternoon. I never answered. On Friday she tried a different approach. A text message at 2 a.m. "Margaret, please. We need to talk. I understand now. Please call me back." I deleted it without responding. The calls became less frequent after that first week, but they never stopped completely. Sometimes weeks would pass in silence. Then suddenly my phone would buzz with Riley's name on the screen. I imagined her sitting in that house, working up the courage to dial my number, probably waiting until William left for work or fell asleep. Spring brought news through the family grapevine. Riley had moved back in with our parents temporarily, while she figured things out. William had apparently agreed to let her go, though Dad mentioned something about paperwork and lawyers that made it sound more complicated than a simple separation. I felt nothing when I heard the news. No triumph, no vindication, no relief. It was simply the logical conclusion to a story that had been written long before Riley ever entered the picture. The family reunion in June was held at my aunt's house in Springfield, the same venue where we'd celebrated every major holiday since I was a child. I almost didn't go, but something drew me there. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a desire for closure I didn't even realize I needed. Riley was there when I arrived, standing alone by the dessert table while conversations flowed around her. She'd gained back some of the weight she'd lost, but there was something broken in her posture, a permanent wariness that hadn't been there before. Her hair was shorter, more practical, and she wore jeans and a simple sweater instead of the designer outfits she'd favored during her marriage. When she saw me walk in, her face went pale. She set down her plate and started to move in my direction, but I turned away and joined a conversation with my cousins about vacation plans. For the next 2 hours I felt her watching me. Every time I glanced in her direction she was there, hovering at the edges of whatever group I was talking to, clearly wanting to approach but lacking the courage to actually do it. Finally, as the evening was winding down and people were saying their goodbyes, she cornered me by the coat closet. "Margaret." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please. Can we just talk for 5 minutes?" I looked at her directly for the first time in over a year. The confident, radiant woman who'd announced her victory at the altar was gone. In her place stood someone who looked haunted, diminished, carrying invisible scars that would probably never fully heal. "What would you like to talk about, Riley?" "You knew." The words came out in a rush. "You knew what he was and you let me take him anyway. You let me walk into that nightmare knowing exactly what would happen to me." I pulled my coat from the closet, taking my time with the buttons. "You didn't ask for my opinion. You just took what you wanted." "I'm your sister." "Yes," I said quietly. "You are. And you stood up at your wedding and announced to 200 people that you'd stolen my fiancé. You made sure everyone knew that he'd chosen you over me. You humiliated me in front of our entire family." Tears started rolling down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. "I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me. Maybe you did love him. Maybe he even loved you in his own broken way. But that was never really the point, was it? You didn't want William. You wanted my life. You wanted to prove that you could take something that belonged to me." "I'm sorry." The words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." I studied her face, looking for traces of the sister I'd grown up with. She was still there, underneath all that damage, but changed in ways that couldn't be undone. "I know you are," I said finally. "But sorry doesn't give me back the 4 years I spent with him. Sorry doesn't erase standing at that altar watching you celebrate stealing my future." I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to her. "You got exactly what you asked for, Riley. You got my life. All of it. Every single part." I left her standing there by the coat closet and I never looked back. In the parking lot, sitting in my car as the engine warmed up, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The cold, calculating fury that had sustained me through the past year was gone, replaced by something much simpler. I was free. Riley would spend the rest of her life dealing with the consequences of her choices. William would move on to his next victim because men like him always did. And I would build a new life, one that belonged entirely to me. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt lighter than I had in years. The story was finally over, and for the first time I was excited to see what came next. If this story of calculated justice had you captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Margaret mailed that package with all the warnings, finally revealing her master plan. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.